Prometheus, Themis, and the rise of monotheism. A thread in the investigation that remains to be tied up centers on the monotheistic aspect of Prometheus, which paralyzes the rise of Christianity in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. In many ways, it is the most critical and unifying piece in this discussion. Karenyi traces the zenith of this convergence between Prometheus and Christian monotheism to 19th century British literature, which ascribed to the Titan a redeemer aspect, though through the personage of Lucifer, though, as Karenyi reminds us, Prometheus was not a redeemer, but rather redeemed by Zeus. This distinction has been lost as the predominant monotheistic meta-narrative has crusaded violently through the Western Hemisphere and beyond. Gingrich faithfully captures the essence of the narrative that connects the dots between Christianity and monotheism, culminating with technology. As he tells it, after ingesting pagan philosophy, Christian monotheism distilled into metaphysics, which served to break the belief system from its origins in mythos and set the roots of logical being. Metaphysics, in turn, set the stage for the Enlightenment and the rise of scientific rationalism, which gave rise in turn to a post-Christian variety of monotheism, eventually to be distilled into modern technology. Technology for Gingrich is the crowning achievement of a logical being in the world that has transcended nature, mythos, and subjectivity, all of which, it is argued, have been subsumed under a dialectical process of logical negation. Prometheus in this light emerges as decidedly post-Christian redeemer, the redeemer as self-creator of Dr. Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus, the forerunner of the engineers of Ridley Scott's Prometheus cycle, and all the variants that set this investigation in motion. 6.1 Monotheism and Meaning. Spiraling back to technology, a closer examination brings us back to its anthropological and archetypal roots. Vygotsky pointed to physical tool fashioning as the precursor to cultural being and meaning-making through the semiotic tool constituted in language. Gingrich confronts us with the possibility that those first physical tools were for killing, and that meaning was first generated in slaughter, an achievement that allegedly did not take place on the empirically factual plane, but rather on the plane of logical negation. And this is how he describes it. Meaning is none other than the logical breakthrough into a fundamentally new status, a status that can be said to be located above and outside of biological life, only to the extent that at the same time it factually also remains in it. There is only an act and an event, not a Marxian superstructure, no Platonist realm of ideas, that is to say, not an independently existing mental world in its own right. The imaginal, the psychological, which later articulates itself and becomes objective for man at first in the form of gods and nature spirits, and then as images and ideas, and later concept, is only as the negated killed life, as a sublation of the merely biological. It needs to be arrested from the life of the animal, a life nonetheless factually continuing all the time, much like fire had to be stolen by Prometheus. And here, in the archaic situation, it is to a large extent still immersed in the actual deeds. Only secondarily can the content of the meaning take on a somewhat independent existence in the form of imaginal ideas, myths, and sculptures over and against the sacrificial act. Unquote. So meaning, it is alleged, would not have been possible without this violent separation from our oneness with Mother Nature, or unio naturalis. And so it seems, to go with Gingrich, the feminine is ultimately overpowered by predatory animus and pushed off from in order to fold into the essential Cartesian one. Toward the end of the quote, Gingrich also hints at the eventual logical negation of meaning from its cultural container and its distillation into a digital syntax of zeros and ones as we pass through the technological phase of this dialectic. Consequently, Gingrich is predicting not only the extrication of meaning from its bio or ecologic, but from its rootedness in culture and intersubjectivity. Hence, Gingrich's dialectic renders Gaia Themis into dust, a ground from which logical being in the world is pushed off, though he arguably concedes the continuity of Gaia Materia in her mechanized modern forms. Hollywood's various depictions of the rise of machines certainly echo this characterization. Before we give Gingrich the last word, before we bury Gaia Themis or salute her in her shiny metal container, we as true detectives make one more pass through the evidence. Armed with lessons from this critique of Prometheus and the hidden power of the feminine, then we have proof that around every monotheistic blade there emerges an engulfing protective ring. Contrary to Gingrich's dogmatic adherence to a Hegelian analytical approach that dissects each and everything into the one, the feminine many is omnipresent and uncompromisingly dialogic, not dialectic, dialogic. It enriches his discourse with history, anthropology, mythology, arts and letters, and in the case of Ridley Scott, filmic texts. We could add to that. Like the blue meanies of the Beatles' masterpiece of animation, Yellow Submarine, who inject cold colors wherever human warmth blossoms in Pepperland, Gingrich is insistent on having the final word of sublating all of the above into his capital P program of squashing the many under the fisted glove of a monotheistic and binary one. He dismisses the importance of accurate employment of any school of thought that wanders from the dialectic, any empirical thing that has not been logically sublated. But the blend is inevitable, even for Gingrich. His cross-disciplinary rhetorical excursions add tremendous substance to his logical negation. It is ultimately quite meaningful, owing to what Bakhtin referred to as dialogic heteroglossia, the notion of all higher order, the notion that all higher order consciousness is rooted in the synthesis of meaning systems. The very fact of conveying meaning demonstrates an arguably mediational feminine principle. Ultimately, Gingrich's, as with anyone else's, words are sublated under language. Language, also known as meaning-making, holds these worlds together. While it may be true that meaning reduces to the binary, perhaps even to ones and zeros, there is no reason to believe that such developments are not part of an organic cycle of renewal. Moreover, we should also bear in mind that not all conceptions of monotheism are rooted in patriarchal hyper-rationalism. Levinas, for example, in defense of monotheism, reminded us of its most cherished notion, of a human kinship around a God of love. 6.2. Inverting the monotheistic container. Let us then consider a flipping of the container and the contained. What if logic subordinates to ecologic? If we accept Gingrich's assertion that language, given the rise of technology, will meet its ultimate kenosis, that is, emptying, purified into a syntactical slipstream of ones and zeros, or logic purified, this notion that some underlying logic or structure underlies all language regardless of experiences or contexts is nothing new. The structuralist line of Saussure, continued through Chomsky, is a testament to this rationalist epistemology, but has not fared well given counter-critiques from social linguists like Himes and post-structuralist philosophers like Derrida. Again, this monotheistic linear narrative of a masculine, disembodied view of soul finds itself encircled by the dynamic nature of meaning. Meaning, as affirmed by feminist critics like Rowland, is ruled by the feminine. It waxes and wanes. It may meet with a long overdue detox, but the wheels of experience will churn new meanings. If we accept that culture, at its core, centers on the interpretation and negotiation of meaning, then we find in meaning something of Themis and the archetypal energies she indexes. At the end of the day, Themis and meaning may be temporarily sublated, but never extinguished.